and welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Tom Fornelli, that's Bud Elliott, that's Danny Cannell, I'm Chip Patterson. Thanks to all of you that are watching live right now on Twitter, live on YouTube, live on Facebook. We are just flexing our multi-platform excellence all through the offseason and on into the 2022 season. That's kind of what we're about. We're about growth. We're about reaching people in more places. And we are excited that you are joining us for today's show. One of the topics that we kick around a lot in small pieces is, player compensation. Hey, I think that with this development and this development, players will be paid one day. Well, let's dig into it. We're going to do that, and we're going to see how we got here, what's next, programs that could benefit, all of that coming up in just a little bit. But there is one story that we're so good. Guys, we're just really, really good at being able to predict exactly what's going to happen and talking about it before the news actually comes down. Because in one of last week's shows, we discussed the future of the college football playoff, sort of our guesses, our predictions, what we had heard, that, maybe there's just too many roadblocks right now for us to be able to see expansion moving forward. We thought there was going to be a March 2nd meeting where they'd be able to vote on it. Nope. There is an announcement from the college football playoff on Friday that says that there will be no expansion until the end of the contract. We'll remain at 4 teams. It was an 8-3 vote, according to reports, with the only 3 no's to this 12-team model being the ACC, the Big Ten, and the Pac-12. Now, each of them have different reasons, based on my understanding, for why they voted no. But, they call themselves the Alliance. They call themselves a voting bloc. And guess what? If your goal was to not expand the playoff, well, I guess you got what you want. So that while it fell exactly in line with what we said on the Cover 3 podcast with the idea that there were too many roadblocks for college football playoff expansion, just real quickly before we dig into the rest of today's show, I wanted to throw this around. Like, was there any surprise? Was there any outrage? Fans have had a chance to really come to the reality that we're sticking at 4 teams, that at least for the foreseeable future. Has your feelings on where we're going and how we declare a national championship, has that changed at all?
No. I mean, it's going to get there eventually. But
you think it's going to be 12 and we'll just be fighting over the AQ bids and all these little details when we start the new 12-year contract?
I mean, it could still be 8, but I think it'll end up being 12. I think that there's just, like everybody, there's always been the jokes about the Alliance, but it's always been a voting block. Like they talked about the scheduling stuff and all that kind of, possibilities, but they got together because the SEC grabbed Oklahoma and Texas, and they wanted to make sure that the 3 of them were, quote unquote, an alliance, and they weren't going to take anybody's schools, and they were going to vote together to make sure that the SEC didn't get everything that it wanted. And then the vote comes out, and there's 3 conferences that vote against it. It's like, that's been the purpose of the thing the entire time. And everybody's acting all surprised and shocked by it. And it's like, no, that's why it exists to begin with, because they want to wait and hold off for as long as possible, because they don't want ESPN having exclusive rights to it. And also, Andy Staples wrote about this on The Athletic too. For the Big Ten, from their perspective, the Big Ten's TV deal is coming up. They're going to have a lot of people that want it because it's an attractive television property.
Indeed.
If the college football playoff expands and the rights to that are also up for bid, the same companies that are going to be bidding for the Big Ten will also now have the opportunity to bid for the playoff, which will impact the Big Ten's ultimate ability to get as much money as possible from those networks. So for the Big Ten, it serves their purpose to push that can further down the road, because that way CBS, NBC, Fox, ESPN, Amazon, anybody that wants to get involved, the premier college football package for the next 4 years is going to be the Big Ten. So all their money's going to go to that.
I think what it comes down to is that the guys who designed the 12-team playoff, they tried to give everybody something they wanted, but it really only made sense for the Big Ten, for the SEC and the Big 12 to vote for it. I think it made some sense for the ACC to vote for it, but the ACC, I think, is at a spot where they need a bit of a Hail Mary. They would make more money in the short term with an expanded 12-team playoff. But I think if you're reading the tea leaves here, they would not make enough money for it to make a difference for them to survive as a conference that has the same footing that it does now. I mean, the SEC is going to be doubling them on a per year basis very soon, as far as conference payouts, and probably tripling in the next 6 to 7 years based on the projections. So I think they're like, hey, we're willing to gamble a little bit because a little bit of money is not really going to help us. We need to somehow strike it rich in the next couple of years with the playoff format. And I also wonder with the ACC saying, hey, player safety, let's take a holistic review. They have never given a damn about player safety in this sport.
But they do care about NIL and transfer portal. There is the ACC university presidents, the athletic directors, they have conveyed to Jim Phillips, and they've developed this united stance that it's things are going crazy over here with the transfer portal, name, image, likeness, and then NCAA governance. I give a little bit to that, but I do think that athletic directors are uncomfortable with where we are at, and that's what we're going to be talking about, obviously, a little bit later on.
I do wonder if the injury concern stuff, and then all of a sudden just them deciding to do all the player safety, let's reduce the time of game, is more to do with potential liability if the Power 5 conferences become the true governors of the sport. If they actually break away from the NCAA, do they not want to inherit something that has a bunch of liability in it without saying, hey, we've taken a bunch of steps here to try to remedy this process? That's kind of the lawyer in me. It's wait a second, you guys have never given a damn about player safety. Why do you care about holistic look and player safety right now? And that's kind of where I think maybe why they're trying to do that. There have been a lot of important changes in the sport, though. Supreme Court decision, NIL, like we're going to be talking about, realignment that I think kind of blindsided people a little bit. I understand why they voted no, but it is a bit of a gamble.
Yeah, I was bummed. I was a little bit upset at Jim Phillips for because I do think that they're the most influential against this. And I'm actually impressed that the Alliance has stood by them with the 3 votes that voted against it. But when I sit back and kind of let the emotions cool down, because, we've all talked about this ad nauseum, I want expansion. So just give it to me. Give me all the expansion I can get. And then when it's there and we get it in June, you're excited. Man, think about the possibility of home field, playoff games, all those things. We're real excited. And then, as Bud was just talking about, things changed, and they changed a lot. And it really did start with Oklahoma, Texas to the SEC. And that was a red alert podcast like we've never seen. Holy cow, is this really happening, right? So we've seen major just moves that have taken place, and the NIL and the transfer portal. And I think it is wise. I can, when we talk on here, it's emotional, we get irrational, and we just spew out our takes. I think if you sat back and you looked at this, I don't love it, but I think, hey, let's not rush into this is not the worst stance to take. Because I think it's interesting because, Chip, you asked the question, do you think we just run the contract and we get 12 teams, or, and Bud said, or 8? I don't know what we're going to get in 2020.
We might get 4. There could be a new 12-year deal of just another 14 playoff.
We might get one conference decide to do their own champion, and there's so much that could happen that I think it might have been wise for Jim Phillips to say, let's slow down a little bit. Let's take a year. Let's see what happens. The Supreme Court, we'll talk about Brett Kavanaugh, how they threw a wrench into things, because they might have their hand forced by 2026, 27, that they might have to pay the players. And so does that impact the way you structure things? And is there a real split between Power 5 and Group of 5? There's just so much that's on the horizon that you really want to enter in another contract, which probably would have been another at least 10 years, something extremely long, that's probably going to end up getting broken up by the time it's there anyway. So as much as I hate it, and I want to see expansion next year, I think it's probably the smart thing to sit back and look at this. I do think you could have tweaked it pretty easily, and done the 8-team, hey, 5 conference champs and 3 wild cards, and everybody probably would have just been on board. You could have done that soon. But I don't think it's crazy that I think it was wise for Jim Phillips to say, let's slow down a little bit.
So go ahead, Tom.
I was going to say also, the part 2 about the patience and being able to wait is it's not like they're going to go broke playing under the current deal. So it's not like there's really a ton of pressure to get it done. And I feel like a lot of, when they leaked that 12-team plan before in the offseason or whenever it was, I feel like that was kind of designed to try to speed things up. And maybe some people weren't totally on board with that. And we're just like, whoa. You're trying to put it out there to get everybody behind it without giving it to us first and trying to force our hand. And I think that came back to bite some people here too.
What did you guys think of the Pac-12's 5-paragraph statement that was like, yeah, we're all about expansion. We love the expansion model. And then you find out they vote against it. Like, was that them basically saying, hey, we're just along for the ride with the alliance? We want
Rose Bowl.
What's that?
Rose
It was all
Bowl.
about the Rose Bowl.
Jim Delaney lobbying on behalf of the Rose Bowl used to be the Big Ten commish. That is money well spent by the Rose Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Rose Bowl, the Pac-12s know. These are just my notes from multiple reports. It comes down to the Rose Bowl, where they want the Rose Bowl to always have a Pac-12 team, and they always wanted to be at 5 p.m. Eastern time on January 1st. The other issue for the Pac-12 was revenue distribution. I think that they are in there fighting about, the SEC is like, well, if we're going to have 4 teams every single year, we want to be able to get a bigger piece of this pie. Pac-12 is not going to have as many teams, but they're going to try to fight for something close to even, or at least more even. For the Big Ten, they were really hung up on automatic qualifiers. They want all Power 5 conferences to be able to have one spot in the playoff. Remember, the initial proposal was 6 highest rated conference champs. The Big Ten is hanging up probably a little bit on the Rose Bowl too, but I've got them as AQ bids specifically guaranteed for the Power 5, and that is not something that is widely supported throughout the room.
Why do we think the Big Ten is really hung up on automatic qualifiers for the Power 5s? Like if you guys thought about this,
Yes,
I don't really know why.
it plays into the alliance.
Okay,
the Pac-12 and the ACC.
Like it helps them out.
Yeah. It gets them in. It also keeps it from being 7 SEC teams, which helps the Big Ten and everybody else in the playoff. There's plenty of reasons why the Big Ten wants AQs.
So what do you make of Greg Sankey saying that we need to rethink our position? The man who authored the plan and went around and pitched it to everybody and tried to sell it came out being really disappointed with what he saw from his peers. We need to rethink our position here.
And the man who wrecked the Big 12, by the way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But also the Big 12 voted for it.
I don't think he's disappointed. I think he's pissed. Mm-hmm. I would be too. If I'm like, think about how much money they probably spent. Think about how much time they probably spent over the last 2 years coming up with this, grand proposal to shape college football for the future. And they announce it. I mean, they look foolish to me, like by having all this happen. And so he's like, all right, you guys want to play this game? I can play that too. That to me is the back off the stance of, yeah, it was an expansion. Yeah, maybe I'll go back. And we'll go ahead and take half of the field if you want to every single year.
That's on Sankey, though. Like, this is his own fault. Because, like we mentioned, like there were 4 people involved in that 12-team plan. It was Sankey, Bowlesby, Craig Thompson, and I cannot remember the 4th person. Swarbrick. So, like, there's 4 of us on this podcast. Let's say Chip and I spend a week together on a retreat coming up with the future of the Cover 3 podcast. And we don't include either of you in it. We don't include Coco. We don't include Jordan. We don't include anybody that is involved with the creation of this podcast. We come up with a plan, and then we just show up one day and say, this is what we're doing. And then you guys just have to go along with it. You don't get any say. I mean, come on, there's going to be pushbacks. And maybe you do like it. Maybe you want to be a part of it, but you had no part in the process of creating it. So you're going to push back against it.
What is the equivalent of you and Chip rating the Big 12 in this scenario?
Oh, and we added, we got Pat McAfee to join the show.
Got it. Okay, yeah. I think the Pac-12 was mostly Rose Bowl, but I also think with George Klakoff, he's a guy who comes from the entertainment side of things, and he really wants there to be multiple partners involved in the playoff. And I don't think he wanted to expand this thing based on the comments that he's made over the last year when it was within the exclusive negotiating window of ABC, ESPN, right? I think he wants to have this be a shared property because he knows you can make more money, whether that is CBS, like I hope, or NBC or Amazon or Twitter or YouTube.
Cover 3 podcast. Again, the Cover 3 podcast will gladly broadcast.
We will air all the games on our YouTube channel. Yes.
I think that also played into it. I'm interested to see if going forward the alliance is going to be actually a scheduling alliance. I think it was more of a, like, if we, the whole, like, hey, maybe the real, the real wins were the friendships we made along the way, right? It might have just been a voting block in the end.
I anticipate that in the end, that will be the most productive thing that it has to show, is the way that it came together to stop an early expansion of the college football playoff before the completion of the contract. One other piece of this, they needed unanimous support to go early. I could be wrong, but I don't think they need unanimous when it comes time to making decisions later, because it would be undoing the deal. That's why they needed everything to be unanimous. 8-3 could be enough to get Sankey and Swarbrick's 12-team model passed. And so I think that the posturing between these conference commissioners now takes a little bit of a backseat, and I'm cool. And we're set. We got 4 teams all the way out, and we will circle back in a couple years to continue this fight.
My official prediction, when they finally do get to 12 after this is over, 5 conference champions, 1 group of 5, 6 at-larges.
So you think 11. They will go to the P5 conference champs?
And that's 12.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They'll succumb to the Power 5 hang up in exchange for being able to get it through.
Yeah, because I think also just long term, I think, college football is a regional sport, no matter how badly we pretend it isn't. But for the playoff, which is a national product and stands to benefit from it being a national product because then there's more eyes on it, it is beneficial to make sure that you have a Pac-12 team in the playoff and a Big 12 team in the playoff and an ACC team and a Big 10. It's a benefit to it overall, the overall health and the amount of money you can make by keeping more people interested.
That's why the SEC won't actually take its ball and go home. It would not shock me if they threatened to do so and like, hey, we're going to have our own playoff and the rest of y'all figured out, you put up your champ and we'll put up our champ, or we'll do a champ, the Big Ten will do a champ, and the rest of the country put up 2 champs, and that's our new 4-teamer. That's not actually going to happen in my estimation, because Sankey is smart enough to realize that he needs eyeballs from all over the country and to get a cut of that. If it's just regional, the SEC doesn't make near as much money.
And also, every conference already has its own playoff. It's called the regular season.
Team regular season. Love to see it. One other bit of news that has broken since the last time that we got together. Jayden Daniels, quarterback for Arizona State, has entered the transfer portal. So we'd lost an offensive coordinator, a defensive coordinator, multiple other staffers, presumably as a result of the NCAA investigation into Arizona State, conducting recruiting and in-person activities during the dead period because of the pandemic. A violation of NCAA rules. Herm Edwards, still the head coach, but Jayden Daniels, your star quarterback, he is in the transfer portal, likely going to be headed elsewhere. A reasonable question, I think, is why is Herm Edwards still the head coach at Arizona State? Why haven't we just done like a full clean house scenario? Multiple players are leaving. And so I pose it to you all. Like, do you think that what is happening at Arizona State, what can we expect from the Sun Devils on the field based on everything that we've seen? And then number 2, like what's the end game? How does this play out for the Sun Devils football as they try to move forward in the cloud of this NCAA investigation?
So a couple things here. One, I talked to some Arizona State guys over the summer on that staff before they had all the staff shakeups, and they didn't like Daniels at all, like as a player. They're like, yeah, man, he makes my guys look bad. They like, this is, off the record, or well, not off the record, just stuff I'm not going to print, and drop names on it. But now that everybody's gone off that staff, it's pretty fair game. They were not.
Hell yeah, blood source is not fired. Let's let it go.
They were not a believer in him.
Yeah.
At all. Now, some guys on the staff were, but a lot of them that I talked to over the summer when I ran into them were not. The other thing I thought was interesting, this is coming out today, Michael Crow, Arizona State president. Have you guys seen this yet?
Mm-mm.
He made a radio appearance this morning, and he said Arizona State coach Herm Edwards was, quote, not part of the program's alleged recruiting violations. He's done an outstanding job of upgrading our overall program. We got this group of people who decided not to play by the rules relative to recruiting. So we'll be looking at how to make improvements, so forth. But Coach Edwards is responsible for all the actions of all of his people. But these are things he did not ask them to do. These are not things he was a part of. Hello.
So that, do you know what it makes me think of? It makes me think about the Miami case, because in the Miami case, what we knew from reports didn't line up with what the NCAA could prove. And obviously the NCAA also broke some of its own rules with the investigation. So evidence that the NCAA had actually had to be thrown out. And I was wondering if what has been reported, which includes Herm Edwards being a part of these in-person visits, maybe the NCAA doesn't have any actual proof of it. And the only thing they're going to be able to hit him with is a failure to monitor.
These in-person visits, were these COVID visits, or was it more like, was it traditional recruiting visit rules that they were breaking?
It was COVID.
So,
it was the dead period.
It was the
during
dead period.
pandemic.
Yeah, brought on by COVID.
Because
I do think there's a play here, Danny, by the way, by Arizona State to essentially, as people become like less, into COVID protocols as time goes by, I wonder if Arizona State's going to be like, look back, it really wasn't that big of a deal, right? When this thing finally gets in front of the NCAA. That seems to be what they're trying to play.
Right,
basically, like the COVID fatigue defense.
But that's also like kind of what I was getting at. And it also goes to like knowing Herm, he's a man of character. And you can take that for whatever you want. Like, I don't think he would try to cheat, like really in a nefarious way, like backroom deals, like traditional bagmen. Like, I don't think he would be in that. Now, some of the guys that I also know that I worked with at ESPN that are no longer there, they absolutely would have been more towing the line. And I could see Herm just as the figurehead, not being fully dialed in on everything. I don't know. I give him a little bit more benefit of the doubt of he didn't know. And maybe that's a personal bias towards him, because I really do think he's a man of principle who's old school. No, cut that out. But I feel like it was his staff that does deserve more of the blame. And I think it's interesting because in the thick of the COVID, and I asked some other coaches about this, like, what'd you think about what was going on at Arizona State? Like recruiting violations when people are paying under the table, I think everybody knows that goes on and everybody kind of, just accepts it for what it is. But with COVID, I think it was a little different because everyone was like getting pressure from university presidents. You guys better knock it off. You better fall in line. These rules are there because we're saving lives and there's lives at risk. So I feel like the majority of college football was trying to do the things the right way, or at least obeying their higher ups. And the fact that Arizona State was going around them really got the vitriol of a lot of college football coaches saying, wait a second, that was the one area we thought was off limits and you guys were pushing the limits. I don't know. It's a hunch, I don't know, Bud, that's what you experienced at the coaching convention too, why people were so upset. Because people were like, yeah, man, Arizona State, they were off their rocker. They deserve to be, there wasn't many people defending Arizona State for what was happening.
They were flying kids in during the dead period and bringing them on, like not only just, hey, like, to the city, they were bringing them on campus in the building. Like that's documented. And, I know there were a lot of other programs that tried to find creative stuff, but everybody I talked to is basically like, look, we were not doing that. Right. Like, did we give you like a video guided tour so you can walk around the campus? And the NCAA slapped our hand on that? Sure. Like that happened. But like you weren't coming in and hanging out with our coaches in the offices. Like it's documented on video that it was by Arizona State. And I think that's one of the reasons they probably got turned in, because the guys on that staff who did turn it in and send in that dossier were like, enough people know about this. It's kind of sloppy. We're going to get turned in by outsiders. Might as well turn ourselves in. And so we don't get caught up in this thing as is. So yeah, it does seem like they were doing some different stuff. I don't know. I don't have, to Chip's original question, I don't have super high hopes for them on the field this year.
Yeah, it's kind of fun timing that Jayden Daniels transfers out, and then Arizona yesterday got like a 4-star commit QB. It's like you feel like things are kind of shifting in that state at the moment. Like one program has all the momentum and all the positive news right now, and the other one has all the negative news.
I wonder if we overestimate the loss of Daniels, though, just based on what I know the coach.
Possibly, because that was a kid who showed up and looked really good as a freshman, had all the talent in the world, and then really never improved from what I saw. In fact, he declined in a couple of areas from me watching him.
Bud, did the coaches that you talked to, they talk about his mom and what a helicopter parent she was? Because I think that was a significant issue, and why. And I think you learned a lot from the players cleaning out his locker. And we're like, good, this dude sucks anyway. Like, that's not true. Like, you normally, today's era, like, I probably would have had the mindset, like, no matter who you were, if you left us hanging, I was going to be pissed. But this is a different era. Kids are like, yeah, go get yours. You got to get paid. You got to do whatever. You got to get to the league. Congrats. Good luck. They were anything but that. So I thought that was pretty revealing, the teammates' reaction. And then you hear some of the things about the access that his mom had that are very unusual. And that, to me, surprised me with Herm at the helm, being an old school guy too. Like, that was very shocking. The like keys to the building type of stuff with his mom, getting that type of access and meeting with coaches on a weekly basis, like over the top stuff with his mom.
I read some reports that was curtailed this year. Coincidentally, that was curtailed around the time that it was revealed that there were emails implicating her in buying or arranging for plane tickets for recruits to come to campus during the dead period. So it seems like she was dissociated a little more from the program after all that stuff came out. But look, I mean, I don't care who you use to buy kids plane tickets. Like,
Yeah,
if you want to fly that close to the sun, all right. I mean, but other coaches will be pissed.
Don't
flying
you think
closer
the most
to the Sun Devils? Yeah.
Don't you think the most likely scenario, because I almost feel like they're like, what can we do now? So they're just going to roll with it. It's probably not going to be a great year. And then I think Herm and the athletic director probably get cleaned out. And then they just kind of start fresh.
Doug Haller of The Athletic had a good write-up about this, and I'd recommend it if you're a subscriber. But he noted in his reporting that it is believed that if before it came down to a firing scenario, that Herm would just retire, that he would just, if it comes down to that, then, let's not make it messy, that he might step away. I don't know if he would fight it, but man, I don't know. I expect that Herm Edwards will be the head coach for the rest for all the 2022 season, and NCAA investigations move so slowly that who knows? We could have this same conversation even coming back next year. Kind of depends on the players that are still there in that Sun Devils locker room, what they're able to do when they do take the field in the fall in the Pac-12 South.
Maybe instead of waiting for the NCAA, they could just have Greg Sankey, Bob Bowlesby, Craig Thompson, and Jack Swarbrick decide what to do.
Hasn't worked out well so far for that group. Coming up on the other side, we did mention, classic, the classic recruiting, paying recruits. Well, name, image, and likeness is on not even a full year old. And the NCAA wants to take another look at its name, image, and likeness policies. So what does the future look like for name, image, and likeness? What does the future look like for player compensation? We're going to get into all that and more next.
Master Chief recovered something.
Sacred ring.
Halo.
When I touched the object, it felt different.
What does one do with a superhuman you're not sure you can trust?
Find the Halo. Win the war.
Shout out to Halo coming out on Paramount Plus next month.
You guys play a lot of Halo?
Halo 1, I was not great at, but I enjoyed the communal experience. And then by the time it got to Halo 2, the game had passed me. What about y'all?
Same.
I mean, it's just not fun to like, oh, you respawn. Oh, you're dead. Oh, you respawn. Oh, you're dead.
I was not allowed to play video games as a kid, so I think it kind of just carried over into adult life.
Your
Never
daughters?
been a gamer.
Any gaming with your daughters?
During COVID, I snatched up an Xbox before they all went off the market, like they were all gone. So they would have something to do. And they did a couple games. And then my daughter, when she broke her ankle, we got it fired back up so she could play Madden. So a little bit. Yeah.
Break out get the old NCAA football in there and we can start like showing her how to recruit.
Yeah, exactly.
Build up at the line of scrimmages first. Always works. All right. So this was name, image, and likeness. We had this on our scheduling board for a while because this is not even a year, but we have certainly seen the impact of name, image, and likeness. It played a huge role in the conversation around the most recent recruiting cycle. And it's, provided a lot of fun, when we look at name, image, and likeness deals that make us smile, make us laugh, then it's also, created a little bit of angst throughout the coaching, university president, and athletic director community. And I thought that with the NCAA looking to, if you are in favor of player compensation and the, wild, wild west name, image, and likeness world that we live in, then you are probably a little bit concerned that the NCAA is going to do a full review of the impact on student athletes. In a news release, the board cited concerns about potential violation of NCAA recruiting rules, the representation for athletes that broker the deals for NIL deals, the booster involvement, as well as schools being involved in potentially arranging deals for incoming players. Of course, we have the very good story from David Ubben about the NIL collective at Tennessee. We have all kinds of, what was it? Nick Saban came up at SEC Media Days. He said that Bryce Young's got it up to $1 million. He just sort of guessed off the top of his head. But I wanted to start with, do you think that we, after 1 year of having this, name, image, and likeness, you're celebrating players being able to profit off their name, image, and likeness in ways that would have been violations? Do you think that opportunity for players is on the chopping block right now? Is it possible that the NCAA rolls this thing back with enough pressure from outside influence?
No.
Okay.
I mean, they could try, but it's just so ripe for an antitrust lawsuit.
Didn't they kind of try? Because they looked into the two deals, the BYU walk-ons deal, which you talk about the worst one possibly from a PR perspective. You could try to go after. And then they went after the Miami Hurricanes, the guy with the gym who said, hey, every player on the team, gets that deal. There's no way. They just can't. They've lost so much over the past year, 5 years. They just don't hold any weight. And I think these programs are like, what? Now the programs are almost like daring them. Like, what are you going to do? And I don't think they're going to do anything. The court of public opinion has already spoken, and I know it shouldn't matter, but also the courts have spoken as well. So they really don't have anything. I thought that was what was comical, though, because even when on July 1st, when NIL went public and the states, okayed it, and then the NCAA had to respond, they said, okay, but under these circumstances. And they said very specifically it wasn't supposed to be about player inducement. And we all know that's all it's about. That's all it's about. And the schools are basically just flaunting it in their face. I don't think there's anything they can do about it.
I say let the market sort it out. Like if some schools want to pay all this money to the players and probably get a terrible return on their investment and keep doing that, okay, cool. Let them. I mean, at some point there's going to be like can't think of the correct financial term here, or economic term, but at some point there's going to be like an equilibrium breaking point where they're going to realize, wait a minute, why am I giving this kid $1 million?
A market correction, because think about if you're, and I don't know the specifics of the deals, and there probably were multiple deals. Let's just say, for instance, you're an Ohio State booster and you're thinking, oh, I can get Quinn Ewers to come to play for the Buckeyes, and you offer him, equity in your company, and you pay him whatever cash, and then he's there for 1 year and leaves, and you don't get any return on your investment whatsoever. And even more so, it wasn't because he wasn't any good. Like, he could go light it up for Texas. Like, the next time around, the next player, do you think you're as likely to offer an equity stake in your kombucha company or your cash offer? I think that's what you're talking about. Like, there's going to be, because these are, hopefully, it can be irrational, but hopefully there's smart businessmen and women that are, ponying up this money. They're going to say, well, hold on a second. Let's make these shorter term deals. Let's not make them quite as lucrative and maybe incentive driven. There's going to be ways around this, I think, where what you're talking about, I think it'll settle. I mean, it's the wild, wild west. And it's like, it's like you were talking about. I mean, think about the internet tech bubble, what took place in the late 90s. And you just bought any company that went public and it was going to go up. And that's what it felt like. Everybody's like, oh, it's a 5-star. Here's the cash. And I think it'll reset. I think it'll come back.
I actually think the money will only increase for a couple reasons. One, those guys who give Quinn Ewers some equity stake in their kombucha company, they did so because they're very competitive and they want Ohio State to win. Those guys who have enough money to play in that pool, but not enough money to have an ownership stake in an NFL team, are going to continue to try to play in that pool. It's why Auburn very seriously considered giving Brian Harsin an $18 million buyout after 1 year. I don't necessarily think it's fair, and I don't think Tom was doing this, but like if you kind of want to extrapolate it, we talk about, hey, like not getting a return on investment from players. There's many more coaches who are paid a lot more money than the players are, who are not delivering, return on investment. I thought David Nubbett had a really good article on The Athletic about this. His Tennessee guy he interviewed said it takes about $10 million to put together a good recruiting class right now. And in the future, they're going to try to get $20 or $25 million to put together a class. Now, as I read that, I thought that's over 4 years. That's not $25 million up front. But I'll ask you guys this. Find me a sport that brings in billions where the coaching staff makes more than the roster. Anywhere close, right? Like Belichick makes 15, and most of these NFL coaches make under 10, and the best quarterbacks make what, 35? I think Mahomes makes 45, I read. Like the best players in these other sports make 3x, 5x. I mean, baseball, they make like 10x of what the coaches make. And I'm not trying to imply that we should have players making 10x of what coaches make in college, because I do think that they're a little bit less proven. But it's not at all crazy if you're a 5-star quarterback to say, hey, I want $2 million a year per year, right? Like there's only so many of them. And if you hit, he's easily worth that to the guys paying in terms of their return of winning games. And if he doesn't, that's kind of priced in.
What about the avenues? What about the avenues for compensation? Because you just used the NFL, and that is the NFL franchise paying both the coach and the player. Our world now is that the player compensation is coming from outside the university, while the university is paying the coach salary. Is like that disconnect makes it even tougher to set any kind of market in my eyes. Like that's why you get the like 25 million for the recruiting class kind of talk, because we are talking about an entirely different unbudgeted pool of money from people, like you're saying, Bud, who are competitive and clearly have this kind of cash to be able to throw around. Like, does the university, does college football need those two systems to be aligned? Because you said it brings in billions, and it does bring in billions, but it doesn't bring in billions for the boosters. This is a bad deal for boosters to get in on NIL stuff. Like the boosters are only profiting in feelings and emotions and happiness.
Ego, yeah.
That's the ego. That's the only thing the boosters get back from this investment, while the universities are the ones that are actually getting the billions from the media rights deals and the performance of the college football players.
That's true. In some ways, they're organizing these as charities, though, which could run afoul of some IRS type stuff, but maybe not, depending on who you do it with. Chip, I think you bring up a really good point, though. At a certain point, if the money gets to this size, if you can figure out the Title IX component, do you want to bring in NIL in-house, kind of like Ohio State did, right? Wouldn't you rather have, if you weren't going to get hit with Title IX stuff and some liability stuff, wouldn't you rather have more control, or at least be more informed of it? Certain states can't do this right now with the current state laws. Like where Danny and I live, you definitely can't bring NIL in-house and have the school manage it. But I think that's what Ohio State did might be a first step as some of these laws change. I don't know that they really want separate booster groups running this. They still want the boosters' money, to be sure, but I think the schools will probably want more control. And I think that is probably one of the next steps that we're going to take to likely having these guys be classified as employees, by the way, down the road. Like there's a couple things happening right now that I think we're fairly close to that going down.
Yeah, and that's the one thing too that I feel like it's rarely brought up, even though we cover college football. What happens to the academic side of all this for these guys? Because forever the payment that they've received has been a scholarship, which I feel like has too often been tossed aside by some people as being worthless. I think it's worth a lot because college is expensive. But at what point, like if I'm paying a kid $2 million to come to play quarterback for me, the hell do I need to give him a scholarship for? You know what I mean? And it's at that point, if that kid's no longer on scholarship and he's technically a walk-on making $2 million a year, why does he need to go to class? He doesn't need to meet any of the academic requirements that come with that scholarship. So at what, like you're saying, buddy, becomes the employee. But what's that going to look like? Are these kids in the future going to be still required to go to certain classes and meet certain academic requirements to stay in the school? Or are they just going to be hired contractors who play for our football team and give us, advertising?
And if you want to go to class, you can.
Yeah.
Sure. Given the two things. One, I was reading Fangraph's top 100 prospects this morning, and shout out Kevin Goldstein and those guys, except for the cheating Astros part. Not one in those 100 guys did I at all read anything about, hey, this kid's good at school or he's not good at school, like he was a bad student. I agree, a scholarship, if you're actually getting a good education, is valuable. But too often these guys are herded into majors that don't really produce much value in terms of degrees. They're not able to really pick what classes they want to go to. I know Danny was, or was it Danny or Andy Staples? One of the guys was talking about, like, they didn't get to pick their classes. They just got handed their schedule on the plane on the way home from the Sugar Bowl. So I agree with you that the scholarship is valuable in certain circumstances. But I think a lot of these teams that are playing at the highest level, the scholarship is not all that valuable.
I mean, more in the fact that the athletic department still has to pay for that scholarship.
But is it a real cost, or is it just like,
yes,
is it
just comes out of their revenue? It comes out of the revenue.
But they're not actually spending that money in their university.
But
it's a spreadsheet cost.
It goes from the athletic department to the university. Athletic departments pay for those scholarships. That's why they have their own separate budgets compared to the school. And that's why all that other money goes to putting water slides inside the facility, because they can't turn a profit.
You are going to break the brains of university presidents who are currently sitting at Power 5 universities if you tell them that the college football players are basically going to be serving the same function as your sports information director, as the office staff, as the graduate, or not graduate assistants, as the offensive line coach, because that is a future that, Tom, like as you're mentioning, is possible. But that's where we start to barrel towards like true breakaway, where some universities might be willing to say, you know what, like, we are just going to create a work world where all of these 18 to 22-year-olds, their job is college football. And I mean, look, at that point, you're probably breaking away from the NCAA. At that point, you probably don't have the same hour limits on practices. You don't have the same hour limits on how much time you can spend with these guys. Like, at that point, you really are just barreling towards universities fielding true minor league college football teams.
Yeah, and let's put ourselves in the minds back when we were 18 or 19. So, like, not necessarily, not like Danny on scholarship playing football, but just 18, 19-year-olds in school. And we've got a job in which we're paying, we're getting 6 figures, maybe even 7 figures a year. Some of us would still be motivated to go to class because we'd think long-term, but most 18, 19-year-olds aren't thinking like that. We're going to be like, well, F this. I'm going to stay home, play Halo. Why the hell am I going to class? I'm making $500,000 a year. I'm going to class to get the job I already have. So it's like, there's no motivation for these kids to keep going to class. So it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, it's going to become professionalized. It's pretty much what the end game is.
I agree with that. The only motivation for a lot of these kids to go to class right now is just to stay eligible. Right. It's not actually to get the degree. Now, that's not all kids, but for a lot of them who are trying to go pro in football, that really is the motivation, right? It's an A or C. There's no difference. Just pass me. I do think there's an interesting quote from a Dennis Dodd article from January I wanted to bring up. This is from Bubba Cunningham, the athletic director at North Carolina. He said, quote, "I think we're probably 2 to 3 years away from having a different relationship with our student athletes." He's entering his 27th year as an AD. It won't necessarily be the student in the university. It may be employee-employer. And then he went on to talk about, like, there's different ways you can do this that probably don't run afoul of Title IX. He's like, look, we have all kinds of employees. Like, graduate assistants are technically employees. Analysts are employees. So they don't necessarily have to be the employee status that you and I think. But I think this is probably coming sooner than we think. They just filed another labor complaint with the NLRB out there in California, trying to loop in USC and UCLA. So the NLRB, National Labor Relations Board, by the way, if you guys are watching at home and don't know, they went USC and UCLA, USC private, UCLA public, to try to basically get them dual as a joint venture under the conference umbrella, so that they can actually impact public schools as well as private. And we want to talk about, like, hey, how do you put a salary cap on college football? The way you do it is you collectively bargain for one. That's why the NFL has a salary cap. That's why the NHL and the NBA and those guys have caps. They've collectively bargained for it. Danny, you were a part of that process. You're definitely not going to get away with having a salary cap on anything if the other side has no bargaining power and no seat at the table. So if you want to kind of get to a spot where here's how the money is capped, I'm not saying we will, but realistically, that's kind of the only way you get there, I think, right now. Because any other just blanket rule that gets thrown out, you're putting cap on what people you're still insisting are not employees can make. That's just going to get torn up in court.
They've had a salary cap for 70 years.
Yeah.
It's been zero, right? I mean, that's what it's been. The Brett Kavanaugh judgment in the Alston case, he shredded any hope of anybody thinking that the amateur model was going to exist. And I've been a believer in it. I remember going on with my old guy, Ryan Russillo, who we had the radio show with. And he asked me probably a year or two ago, he was like, well, when's the money too much? Because I would always say, it's expensive. It's expensive to run all of college athletics. It's not just football. It's not just basketball. It's every sport that's out there. But the numbers that you're hearing that are coming out, I'm like, okay. I've kind of thrown in the towel and been like, there is enough money and then some to go around where you could make this happen. So I'm very curious though, Bud, do you have any, because I feel like you know something that you don't want to say. Like if you say, what do you think this would look like? Where does it come from? What makes it different from a school paying a coach's salary versus paying all the players' salary? Because he doesn't have to go to class. Is that wouldn't it be just easy to say, yeah, you can go to class if you want to, but then how many kids are going to go is right?
I think they would still make them go to class, to be honest, just because it preserves some of that traditional structure. I think if you're going to get university presidents to go along with it, you're probably wanting to preserve that. One of the things they have to figure out is the Title IX issue, right? But does that actually
explain that? What is this? Because I get that all the time, and I know that was a big one, but I would say the counter would be that, what is that? I thought that was equal access to facilities, scholarships. But if it's different, how do you justify Nick Saban making, 10 million plus and the women's basketball coach making $1 million? How is that? I'm guessing the pool for his coaching staff is different than the women's softball team, which is really good at Alabama, but I don't think they're anywhere close. So why would it be so much different?
So it's because of the educational aspect, right? You're not giving Nick Saban the educational opportunity or the women's softball coach an educational opportunity. The students, they kind of tied in to that, right? The educational opportunity, which is why I'm interested. If you make them employees, is that an in run around Title IX, right? If you make your Rev Sports employees, and that complaint to the NLRB is not just football. It's also men's basketball and women's basketball, the sports that it claims make money. I'd be interested to see how much money, some of those sports make other than football across the country, but certainly a lot of them on the men's basketball tournament make a pretty good amount. So there's some issues you have to figure out there. But I do think that this is probably coming this way. Otherwise, it's very, very Wild Westy.
If you have players becoming employees, or that relationship eventually becoming a employer-employee relationship, does NIL still even need to exist, or is that just another shock to the NIL market?
I mean, NIL will always exist. But if you start paying guys through the school, you don't need to give them fake. Fake's not the right word. They're using NIL
live on YouTube.
It's more endorsement based, right? Yeah. Actual value of endorsement, as opposed to currently NIL is your actual value of endorsement plus your enjoyment value to whatever millionaire booster wants to see his team win, right? Or whatever guy wants to get $50 a month charged to his credit card through one of these collectives. So I think we will always have NIL, but it's just endorsements like it is in any other sport that pays its players, right? Like Danny, you didn't get like your endorsement value was basically commensurate with your actual marketing value.
Right.
I also think you'll see far less money spent in facilities because you don't need to fake like you're losing money like you are right now to maintain your nonprofit status. Like right now, they do this great spend down, like, oh, we got to upgrade these facilities. And everybody's like, oh, we need to upgrade ours because they upgraded theirs. And you have this big facilities war. In the NFL, nobody's like, hey, man, I don't want to sign with Cincinnati because they don't have an indoor facility, right? Nobody gives a damn about that. It's like, how many commas are you going to put in my check? Who am I going to be playing with? And do I like living in the city?
Steelers
Basically.
and Pitt share the same building.
Does Pittsburgh still sign free agents?
Yes.
Right. Because like they're like, oh, we need this building for recruiting. No, you don't. I mean, you in the current structure, sure. And nobody wants to live in like a totally rundown place, but realistically, that is not the most important thing. It's only the most important thing because you have a cap of 0 right now on what you can pay your quote unquote non-employees, and so you have to always do this great spend down to show that you're losing money overall, so you can maintain your nonprofit status.
I don't know. Like one way I always felt, and I don't know how it applies now, but I always wondered if this would be an easy workaround that the schools never did, both for NIL and just academics and everything. When you go to college, you choose a major. The major you choose is in line with what you intend your employment to be, career to be after you leave school, whether it ends up being that or not. But like if you want to be a lawyer, you go to law school. If you want to be a doctor, you go to medical school. You major in the subjects that you need to major in to get into those. Why schools just never made football a major or basketball a major? That would have been a complete and easy workaround to me. Like, I'm going to school and I'm majoring in football and my classes are football. I go to practice. I go to the weight room. I do all this. I want to professionally play football. And I feel this school is the best one to prepare me for that and the classes they have. I mean, I think the reason why they never did that was because the presidents of the schools would feel like it would tarnish the university's reputation.
It's a little too on the nose.
Yeah. But like, if they would have just made those changes like 20 years ago, I think they're avoiding a lot of the problems they're facing right now.
Oh, yeah. A lot of the problems. If the NCAA had been so stubborn and just dug in the sand and made a few concessions, we could have avoided all this, and they could have kept their hand in the cookie jar and done everything they wanted to if they just would have given a little bit.
Because not everybody that goes to law school becomes a lawyer, just like not everybody that goes to football school becomes a football player.
And if you're a football major, doesn't guarantee you're going to get a football job.
No,
by the time you're done with college.
Right.
You might end up blogging.
Yeah, you can. Hey, come on down. You can join the rest of us that barely got out of university and wound up blogging. All right, couple fun ones right here. So we've discussed and referenced the NIL collective. How much do you think is an appropriate cost for a recruiting class now?
How good do you want to be?
That's
what are the kids 40 times?
Like, what are you pulling together? You're in charge of the Cover 3 collective for our university. How much money do you think is like, where do you draw the line between that's too much, and not on a per person, but if we believe that there's a mythical $25 million number, and if we know that there's a $10 million number, where do you think is an appropriate use of funds based on the current market as we know it?
By the way, back to the signing day conversation real quick. I think the real reason Jimbo was so angry about the $25 million rumor is that if you allow that to be out there, the kids look around like, wait, I know what I got. How does that add up to 25? And they get mad about a fake number. You know what I'm saying? Like, wait, if you guys spent 25, how am I only getting, $750 a year? That doesn't make any sense. I'm like the number 5 player in this class. So I think that was really important for him to quash that, even though they're not directly involved. Like, clearly, if I'm a player and I'm in that class and I hear you spent 25 million, I'm calling like, hey,
500.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, what do we think the going rate is? Like
5-star defensive lineman, I think, is getting $1 million a year.
What about a 5-star quarterback?
Probably 2.
Yeah.
Which, people are, and I'm sure a lot of listeners are like, holy cow, I can't believe that type of money. if you look at the Major League Baseball draft, when you're drafted out of high school,
Mhm.
you're a top 10 pick. You know, you're getting that kind of
paid.
money.
Yeah. I would
And
do.
how
I
many
would follow
people can
Danny's
name
idea.
those guys?
Not many. I could, and Bud can because he reads top 100 articles on Fangraphs, but not many other people could. But I like Danny's idea as far as how much I would be spending on my recruiting class. How much do I pay my coaching staff? Cutting that in half.
Yep.
And then I'm adding about 15 million to that. And that's how much I'm paying my recruiting class. And my coaches will take that pay cut because now that I'm just buying the players, they don't have to recruit as much. Like their jobs are going to become a little bit easier because you could just say, hey, we play football here and we offer you $750K a year to come play if you want.
Right. That's where the correction, that might be where the correction comes. You know, when you think about it, like maybe people schools get tired of paying their coaches. They figure out a way to get the money to the collectives, and then you can actually get the money to the players that matter the most. And some coach is going to be like, sure, I'll take the pay cut, but put me like do a Harbaugh deal. If I win the Big Ten, if I win a conference championship, if I make the playoffs, give me a couple $1 million bonus, and you're going to be playing, because you can rig the system. There is a talent advantage that you're going to have almost every time,
Also, do you think there's any chance, and I'm getting off topic here, so I apologize, but it's along the same lines.
It's the off season. Let's do it.
If we're paying the kids, they're getting these salaries, is there any chance the NFL reconsiders its 3-year eligibility rule before you're eligible for the draft, based on the fact that it's like, well, maybe we can get some of these kids early? So, like, okay, this college is offering me $1 million, but the NFL might give me this. Is there any chance you think the NFL kind of reconsiders its stance on that?
They would still have to pay more money for guys who, for the most part, are more developmental than immediately marketable. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if the colleges didn't care about winning, then they would essentially just be minor league baseball teams. And minor league baseball teams don't care about winning, right? Like, no minor league manager gets hired or fired based on their record. The front office that owns that team or is affiliated with that team does not give a damn if they win a single game. They really just want to see the player skills improve. That would largely be the way that the NFL would have to treat these guys for the most part. Like, yeah, some teams would be very excited to draft some of these dudes and get their hooks in them early and secure those rights. But I don't know if they have the same value to the NFL teams as they do to some of these college teams, because colleges are making money off the wins and losses as well. And the NFL makes a lot of money by having like zero player development costs.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like one of the biggest benefactors of NIL is going to be college basketball, and I think we've already kind of seen the results of that. Because there's a lot of kids who, in previous years, would go to school for a year or two, probably leave too early, go to the NBA, get drafted in the second round, end up in the G League. Now those kids have motivation to stay in school because schools can pay them to stay, and it helps the programs. And I think that the overall health of the sport, you get better teams and more better players, and it's better for the sport overall. So I just wonder if the NFL, I was just kind of figuring out if there's maybe a correlation there, if the NFL might change its approach too.
So to wrap things up, NIL is going to be reviewed by the NCAA, but we do not expect them to be able to get the toothpaste back in the tube, right? They're not going to be able to cap this and say certain players can only get this amount of deals. They're not going to cap this and say, there are, teams have some obligation. I mean, the NCAA just can't get in the way of that, right? That's it. Like, NIL,
do you think they're dumb enough to try? Because Bud, do you think they're dumb enough to try?
They might be. They might attempt somehow with the inducement thing, or try to make an example out of somebody initially or something. But ultimately, guys, I just shot a video on how recruits, if they don't sign in the early signing period and they wait till the traditional signing period, they can make a lot more money, because all these schools who missed on guys in the early period still have all this powder they've kept dry. And then they need to spend it on somebody. So if you're like a 5-star defensive lineman who decided to wait for the traditional signing period, you might have got $5 million over 4 years, right?
Yeah,
I was just down. Yeah, so I was just down there in a Miami camp. There was a lot of big time numbers thrown around from South Florida. So no, I don't think it's going back in the tube. I think it'll be interesting to see if schools say, screw it, we're bringing this in-house so we can exert a little more control and influence on it. Not in terms of limiting what players make perspective, but in terms of, like, right now you got to kind of clandestinely communicate with your boosters who you want, and then how do you structure this deal? And, I've also heard there's boosters running around there with the NIL stuff who are actually offending families, right? I was talking to coaches like, we got these guys and I'm glad they're throwing in NIL money, but like, this is not a family that is going to take kindly to you just being like, hey, nice to meet you. Here's money, right? Like, get to know me first. Talk about some education, talking about your football development program, and then let's talk NIL. So the ability to bring it in-house and exert more control over the whole program, I think is something schools will probably eventually come around to if they can figure out the Title IX. Because I know Emil asked about this in the chat, and that's a difficult situation there, because if you're all of a sudden in charge of getting extra money for your athletes while they're still students and not employees, you may run afoul of Title IX. So it'll be interesting to see how this all swings.
Did you see, I don't know, Bud, I don't know if you had Chip LaMarca. He's a Florida State guy, but he's a legislator. And he's trying to pass a law that will allow the school to broker the deal directly with the players. And I talked to Mike Norvell about that the day before signing day. He was, because he was on it. And I think there are some states where you're allowed to with the school.
Correct. That's what happens.
So they want to put all on the same footing where, then you don't need the collectives. You don't need anybody. You just use the booster department or the coaching staff. Because imagine that, like trying to say, like, this is where it's stupid. Like, you get offended, like you're talking about. What if you go pay some guy and the coaching staff is like, he doesn't really fit our system, or we don't need that. We don't have a need for that guy. We need this guy. And you just wasted $1 million on that guy.
Exactly right. I mean, there's problems right now where like, hey, how high is this kid really on the board?
All right, so the school-sponsored marketplace, essentially, like I've referenced it before, but Michigan State launched an NIL marketplace that I looked at as Match.com. I'm a Michigan State athlete. I've got my profile. I'm a East Lansing business owner, and you get matched up, and then the school is able to oversee it. You're talking about the inducements. Like, you're talking about the NIL opportunities before they become athletes.
Correct.
Schools cannot bring in-house. Like the NCAA, I believe the NCAA will not let schools to bring in-house NIL tied specifically to recruiting before the NLI, but before they sign with the school, essentially. That the only thing that the school is going to be allowed to broker are deals with current student athletes, and that you're still going to have to go clandestine booster, wink, wink, nod, nod, I think, until they actually get on campus.
Over what timeline do you think that they're not going to allow this to happen? Because if you have this opinion over the long term, I'm interested in a show bet here.
I'm not interested in because
in a long-term show bet.
in a long-term show bet on the future compensation of college football players. I do think that the idea about making them employers also changes the recruiting game in a big way. So it's interesting to consider, but I think that NIL right now as is probably pretty safe, right?
I think so.
Yeah, I think so too. Woo! Hot stuff. Anything else before we get out of here? I knew it's a deep topic. I thank you all you for joining with us. I love being able to talk about this stuff with these people because the perspectives, the opinions that are all very smart, and I keep thinking about this stuff even after we sign off the call. So glad we got to spend some time enjoying it. Hey, if you want to lob in a nice little discussion topic, you've got great opportunities by adding a question to the big old bag of mail. You could do that by leaving a 5-star review. And in that review, go ahead and put your mailbag question. We will throw it in a future mailbag episode. We'll be back tomorrow live, 11 a.m. Eastern time, wherever you find us, youtube.com/cover3. Of course, always a fantastic option with a new collection of questions from the big old bag of mail. And you can follow him on Twitter at Tom Fornelli. You can follow him at Bud Elliott 3. You can follow him at Danny Cannell. You can follow me at Chip_Patterson. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
See y'all.